Alice, and I just loved it. I loved the humor, the laughter, the wordplay, especially. I was interested in poetry, so all the work with language attracted to me. And the other thing that was kind of interesting was, here was this Ivy League professor, Harvard and Stanford educated, teaching Alice in a Victorian comedy course. So I found myself, after that semester, as a double English biology major, an advisor who was a Carrollian and a Victorian scholar, and interested in Victorian studies in general. So that was the first time, I did it for whimsy, but it became almost like a life. So I've lived a life of whimsy. And Carroll was, I studied Carroll then as an undergrad. Then I went off and got a master's degree. And then I started my doctorate. And when I started my doctorate, I was working on my doctorate. I went off in 1974 on one of those, my second annual, great Victorian world travel. And I stopped in at Oxford University to see Carroll's digs. And there was a poster there that says, "Join the Lewis Carroll Society." So I joined, and boy, it's history after that. Anne Clark was the secretary, and I wrote to her, and I became a member. And 2 months later, I'm back studying in the US, and I get an email from, not email, I got a letter from Stan Mark saying, "We're going to set up a Lewis Carroll Society in North America. Do you want to join? It's Princeton on this day." And it turned out that he was literally a neighbor of mine, and I needed to go to Princeton anyway. And he had gotten the name from the members of the British Society, which is how Martin Gardner and Elizabeth Sewell, Florence Becker Lennon were all at that first, Morton Cohen were all at that first meeting. But one of the relevancies, though, is I just happened to hit Victorian studies and Carroll at a time in the history of the Academy when it was okay to study Carroll. He was a serious author all of a sudden. And if a guy at Brown and Harvard and Stanford could teach him, and Morton Cohen could edit his letters from City College and the CUNY Graduate Center, and Don Racken at Temple could write some fantastic works, he was being accepted. Racken wrote his most famous essay, which was published in the publications of the Modern Language Association, PMLA, in 1966. And that really put it on the map, Carroll on the map in academia, along with Martin Gardner's 1960, The Annotated Alice. But it also, for me, not only could I study Carroll, it was kind of cool to study Carroll. It was kind of reverse chic. You could mention Carroll and you were hip. I mean, the Beatles mentioned Carroll. Everybody mentions Carroll. So he was all of a sudden from nowhere accepted. And every year since then, I think because of the societies, because of some of the publications and work we've done and people like me have written, that his place in the Academy is stronger every year that we go on. So my interest is as an adult. I can also, when I took my PhD oral exams, I got very good advice. They said, when you get a question that you can answer, just keep talking, because then they can't ask you questions that you don't know. So I can continue this answer quite at length, but I'll let you ask me some more. I'll try to come back to it.
Well, this is probably related to it, but why did the world need another book about Lewis Carroll? I've got a stack of quite a few. You wrote these, and yet you've produced another one.
Yes, well, there's a short answer and the background to that. The short answer is I was asked if I wanted to write it. And I wasn't quite prepared when I was asked to answer, but I said, give me time. The background to that was my Lewis Carroll, the International Bibliography that the Society in Virginia, University of Virginia Press published in 1980, was published in England by another press. And that press, or the owner of that press, the editor-in-chief, is the person who continues to be a publisher. And he asked me, he said, basically, write what you want about Carroll and I'll publish it. I mean, that was like a carte blanche, which got me thinking, which I'll answer that part, but I also have to contextualize and say, I had just, when this happened was February 2017. In January, the end of January 2016, I finished up as a university president after almost 17 years, and they give you a sabbatical year after that, and then you can figure out what you want to do or come back to the faculty or something. So it was my last day. It's easy to remember because it was the first day that Donald Trump became president. So there I was. I had some ideas, but I was pretty exhausted. Being a president is a life. It's not a job, and there's always a lot of pressure. I got the university open for the second spring semester. That was part of the deal, and then I could go off and they could hire somebody. The search was ongoing, of course. And I thought I would write a book on global education, which I know a bit about, or at least I knew a lot about then. But I also have edited forever, it seems, 4 decades, a scholarly journal called Dickens Studies Annual Essays on Victorian Fiction. And I come back from a 2-week vacation after retiring, and there's a problem with the journal. Or Dickens Studies that I worked on. So I was in touch with this fellow in England, and he said, okay, we worked on the Dickens. And he said, by the way, would you write this book? Because he wanted to do a series on Victorian writers in their context. And he had some very famous people. Well, I was the second one, but he has some pretty famous authors agreeing to do that. So I said, let me think about it, because again, I didn't expect to do it. But why did I do it is your question, and why did the world need it? Well, for a couple of reasons. I mean, I had written personally, given talks all over, I'd written, edited books, introduction, articles. So I thought about bringing much of my work together and some ideas together, revisit them. Wouldn't be a bad thing to do, put everything together. But the real reason was to set the record straight. There's not an authoritative current book that had access to all the letters, the diaries, the pamphlets, the catalogue raisonné of the photographs. So, and what I am more than I'm not a collector. I'm a little bit of a literary critic, more than the other members, say, of the society. But I am someone who had, I collected information about Carroll. So I really knew, or any scholarly publication for the last ever, since the beginning, I have looked at. I did that in all languages and for the annotated international bibliography. I wrote one year a comprehensive review of publications on Carroll by looking at the scholarly essays and kind of sorting them out. And then, so I said, well, first thing I had to do was read what happened in the last 10 years. So I systematically went about reading everything I could, 1,000, or finding, from all over the world. It's the scholarly journal pieces that no one looks at. And I went through that. And by May, I just wrote another review essay about that. But I had the bibliography that nobody else had, of what you could read, should read, what's good, what's not, what, the essentials. And I put it in the book. But now I was ready to write. And again, the book was meant if I can speak about, I mean, there's a dedication page. I don't know if you noticed it. It says, for all those curiouser and curiouser about a man and his Alice's. So it's a blend of about the man, about the myths, about the life, but also more equally important about the value and greatness of his literary works. Obviously, the two Alices, the snark, the greatness of his photography, I would say the greatness of his poetry, but I made it all comprehensive. And then in that as well, looked at what we nowadays call the afterlife. So I looked at, why Carroll, why did Carroll become important in the Academy? Why is he in these movies? Why? And came up with some reasons why that is. So that's for the people, for the audience, for the book, I guess I was writing.
Unmute. You said once that your intended audience was intelligent but uninformed.
Well, 30, 40 years as a university president, that's my audience. That's always been my audience. Right. Intelligent but uninformed. An undergraduate in college, a graduate student in college, certainly high school students. You don't want to insult them. They're smart. Right. But that's because they don't. I mean, I was always humbled as a professor by all the knowledge the students had about things that I didn't. I mean, they had encyclopedic knowledge. So I knew they had the intelligence, and you probably in high school with advanced place, smart aleck kids, you had that too. So how do you speak to people about something they're curious about, but they're not really that expert? And then how do you speak to people who are sort of out of date? Because remember, what I tried to do is take the Carroll from the 60s and 70s and bring him into the first quarter century of this century. So that updated, and they needed to read because we have so many more resources available.
It's true. We do. For example, I remember an interview you did once with Morton Cohen in which he talked about interviewing people who had known Lewis Carroll when they were children. And that was certainly awe-inspiring to hear that. And we can't do that anymore, but there's been all this other research, and you named some of the people who were influential.
Yeah, it's too bad. I mean, we have a video of me talking with Morton the second time around. He was much better, and probably I was the first time around. We don't have those interviews and he published a book of interviews and recollections on Carroll's doing his research. But I think there's a distinction that's important. You've got on one hand Martin Gardner. I'm going to back up and start a different way. If there's a theme in my book, there are 3 or 4 of them. One of them is it's a book that's written as more for adults than children, or as much. So this duality of a book really crafted for children and crafted for adults. And that's why we study Carroll, because of Alice, period. End of story, unless maybe photography, if that's your specialty. Well, that got people much more interested in this man, Charles Dodson. And of course, there's wonderful stories, got do personalities and all this. So Martin Gardner was an annotator of his text that made it accessible to adults. Tremendous, important work, and a wonderful, wonderful man. You have another crew of people, Morton Cohen, preeminent in them, Edward Wakeling, eminent, Charlie Lovett, I'd say, who did primary research. They edited the diaries, the society edited the pamphlets, Fran Aberle's on math. I can name them all. But we, as a result of the Wakelings, or even Selman Goodacre doing the text editing, they're just making the primary materials accessible. I think I did a bit of that by publishing unpublished drawings, unpublished photographs, pointing out enough that stimulated people to go further in their work, for sure. But that's a different category of scholar. And that's where where the leap is. There's not that much more to go there. There's more letters to come out and things like that. But then we have the Don Rackens, the Roger Hankels, who would analyze the works. And I fall a little bit more into that category, but I tried in this book to be both, because I knew both and tried to, ground this. But I think you just talked about, I need to mention Peter Heath too. He was the second president of the society, a philosopher, faculty member at the University of Virginia, and his Philosopher's Alice is an annotated version, and it's a wonderful book. And I remember Peter Heath, he was always saying, he was in the Martin Gardner, Edward Guiliano adult literature school, and he would say it's children especially who have a small chance of understanding what these Alice books are all about, because he saw how wonderfully crafted they were and designed for adults. And if I may, I think if anyone has ever looked at Alice's Adventures Underground and then compared it with Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, you can see very clearly the Dodson Carroll editing and expanding on the nice little story he told to a young child to expand to something that appealed to adults. The first version he shared with children and children's parents. The second he shared with a lot of adults who said, you got to publish it, you need to get to Neil to illustrate and all of that. I see Heather's picture. Does that mean she wants to say something?
It does. I have an audience question, but actually before I say that, intelligent but uninformed, I love that characterization because, I don't know, with me, the jury might be out on intelligent, but uninformed is definitely what I was about Snark. And I really appreciated your chapter in this book about Hunting of the Snark, because I've certainly read it. I know like the origin story of him walking along the moor being all upset, but I really didn't understand it. So I enjoyed that primer personally a lot. Now our question comes from Michael. I love this question. He says, in the book, you write that Wonderland is random and nonsensical, but Looking Glass Land is determined and absurd. What is the difference between nonsensical and absurd?
Nonsense has no meaning. It's nonsensical. Absurd is when you take logic and you push it too far, it becomes almost ridiculous. So absurd is taking logic to its absurd extreme. So Wonderland, there's no determinism in Wonderland. Alice falls down a rabbit hole. She has all these zany characters she meets, and she doesn't grow particularly, but we enjoy the wordplay, we enjoy the characters, we certainly enjoy the humor in all of it, and there's no determinism in it. So there's no there, going there in Alice. It's almost in the present tense. Looking Glass is very deterministic. It's a chessboard, all the world of the chessboard. Alice sees it, I want to be a pawn, then maybe I can be a queen, and it's determined even all those moves. And it's a darker book. I mean, it's the life is life but a dream book. Go out like a candle. That's scary. It's the snark, if I may go back. The snark is nonsense, but it's sort of in between those two. And there's a quest. Alice is a kind of, through the Looking Glass is a better quest because they're going somewhere, but so is a snark. They're hunting a snark. To postulate a bit about your snark, let me say, if you want to look at Carroll's great works of poetry, number one in everybody's mind is Jabberwocky, which is nonsense, except there's a little bit of there's a story there. Just fill in words at various points. So Jabberwocky is this great nonsense poem. maybe his greater poem, or as great a poem in the parody genre where he exceeds, is in that book, which is The White Knight's Ballad, and I'll certainly want to talk about that when I speak the next time. Hunting in the Snark is way up there. So those are the three pretty much great poems. You can get another poem which is more the pure nonsense version, with the associative nonsense, that we get in almost a dream visions associative way, poetry, and that's the Mad Gardener's song in Sylvie and Bruno. Those four poems are just, masterpieces, and they're a little bit different from the pure nonsense of meaning to the determinism and absurd. That's why the surrealists love Carroll, right? For the absurdity of some of his works. But some of them, the parodies are not absurd for the most part, unless you get the Mad Gardener song. Did I answer the question, Cindy? You're my judge, teacher.
No, very, very well. That's wonderful. And I want to remind people that you will be talking at length about poetry at the Lewis Carroll Society meeting on October 10th. That will also be online, a Zoom meeting, so everyone can see that. I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. I always impress myself with what I say. Filled my head with ideas. I just didn't know what they were.
Well, I'm sure it will be wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. Do we have another question, Heather? Well, let's move on. Let's see.
We do, but I was going to hang on to it for a little while because I think it might open up a whole Pandora's box.
Okay. Well, I threatened you with conversation and pictures, and you say in your book it is not possible to experience Alice without experiencing the illustrations. And, of course, Lewis Carroll had a wonderful sense of composition, which we saw in his original pictures and his photographs. And maybe you'd like to talk about that, the way he integrated the text with the pictures.
Yeah. So we all know he was a great photographer. But it's also very clear he had a visual imagination. He, in his juvenilia, always illustrated, the magazines had illustrations. He always conceived of that. And then, when he, again, wrote, Alice says, okay, tell me, please write it down, Mr. Dodson. And he writes it down, and we have it, but he's illustrated it. So he conceived of the book not as a book without pictures, but a book with pictures, but he inserts the pictures very much inside. He sees, it's a really fascinating thing. He abandons text for pictures. Here he is, the great text master, the great poet, the great wordplay artist. And then at times he says, shout out, if you don't know what a griffin looks like, here it is, have a look. The Hunting of the Snark, there's no descriptions of any characters. He relies on images. So in his head, pictures and text go together as a kind of gestalt. You can't have one without the other. I think what I was saying in that you can't experience Alice without the pictures is that no matter what illustrator you like, what movie you're watching, we still have the Tenniel or Tenniel Alice drawings in our head. It's because they're part of the text, integrated all the time. I think the picture you're seeing here is a theme that I started, and it runs through the book. And I did talk about that at San Diego State University a bit, about how Carroll is really the illustrator of all of his books. The great creative mind behind these wonderful drawings was his, not Tenniel. He hired these people as draftspeople. He sent them extraordinary, careful instructions. But here's a case where he sent literally his own drawing. These are from Underground. So there's no imagination in Tennille's. This is all Carroll. So Carroll is certainly plenty of records now that he is a de facto illustrator. He hired a draftsperson along the way. They contributed a bit. I'm not trying to diminish them, but he's the great mind. But the interesting thing to me, and I said this maybe, really a long time ago, maybe 1976, I was always struck by the raw energy of his drawings. So they come alive, they're more powerful, they're funnier, all the cleverness is his. And his friends told him, between Underground and Wonderland, you better go out and get a professional society novel illustrator, maybe a funny one from Punch or something. But he gets Furness and the Sidney Paget tradition of illustrated magazines. He needed those because he was frustrated that his drawing wasn't so good. What I came to realize just in redoing this, rethinking, is that today his drawings would be way more accepted than they were then. In the anime world of cartoons and droopy-eyed characters, cartoons for adults, we're good with it. And therefore, the power of those illustrations speak to us today a lot better than they did at the time. Sylvie and Bruno, which one do you like better? Here we are looking at the open mouths. This is like, you can find that in any cartoon, right? They're funnier characters. I like the eyes. I like the way they come alive. There's certainly also, by the way, there's a beautiful composition there. This is the photographer who knew how to,
yes,
theater, mise en scène, experienced attendee who shaped things very well. So that's a well-framed illustration, I think. And I think it's much more alive than the Furness, which is clearly better drawn. And I don't know what those funny bushes are in the background or why they're there, but these are all characters. And the whole point was that Carroll, I like the bellies of, but other than that, I think, again, the point is he had this imagination that had so many things going on in terms of language, and illustrations were the visual language that he was fluent at, as well as verbal language.
You had an interesting discussion in your book about a photograph of the MacDonald family and the composition and what that said about Carroll and his relationship to children.
Yes. Well, I put this photograph in the book, and I put it in the portion where I'm talking about the genesis of Alice. Mm-hmm. And for me, for everybody in a sense, and Alice is a revolution in children's literature. There's a before and after Alice as I speak about it, because Alice is a book where we have a child protagonist. We see much of the story through her eyes. She speaks, she's a narrator at some portions. There's the Carroll look at the Griffin there too, and he tells the story to a child from the child's perspective. Before Alice, most of the children's books were written by adults in a tone of voice addressing miniature adults, so-called children, and they all had a moral. So the great change in Alice is that Carroll doesn't want a moral. He lambasts morals, and children laugh at that. They identify with that. So if you go back to that picture, I think what I pointed out, and there's many things I can point out, there's you can see Mrs. McDonald there as a nice Victorian lady who would not get on the ground with the kids. You get Carroll with the McDonald children, very much relaxed, down at their level among them. So all the child friends loved him. He was one of them. They accepted him and he accepted them on their own terms. He was very amused by them. He reported what they said. He teased them. He gave puzzles. They loved it. They were not threatened in that way. And he was very comfortable with children. And I think this picture shows it. This is one of the few, if the only photograph we have of Carroll with children, though we have so much written pictures in his letters and his diary about him with children. And we have the great story of Alice and how they always got on together clearly. It was a great tragedy for little Alice, when she grew up and outgrew Carroll, because he was a very important figure in her childhood and they had great times together. And Carroll spent the rest of his life not wishing he, was with 19-year-old Alice when Looking Glass came out, or 50-year-old Alice. He wants the same 7 and 7.5-year-old Alice and recapture youth. And that's always the theme, the innocence and the youth and the childhood purity that comes out many of his poems, and certainly in his works, and certainly in his themes about time and death and inevitability.
I think this might be a good time for a question from Stephanie. And I'll have you know, I looked up this word before saying it aloud. I recall Edwards writing years ago, perhaps in Soaring with the Dodo, that Carroll's orientation to the world was scopophilic.
So what did you, for the benefit of everybody else, what did you find it to be?
One moment. The medical definition of scopophilia, a desire to look at sexually stimulating scenes, especially as a substitute for actual sexual participation.
Yeah, that's the medical. And so one of the things I tried to do in the book, besides, of course, talk about the literature, tell the story, but also in 2 chapters, I try to address all of those sexual questions or the drug questions, all those myths that now the literature provides us with the references. We can make more sound evidence-based proofs. So Carroll's sexuality is one of those things I dealt with in a couple of places. And I think the first thing that's important is that there was sexuality. So I'll read you something from the book. See if I can find something here. There's 2 places. I mean, it's the famous one that everybody knows is when they cut out the diary pages, and like, why were they cut? What is it? Was there something that had to do with sex in them? Also, the nude photographs, was he a pervert? Those are the 2 kind of stories that question his sexuality. But there's if I can find the right place. So there are this latter generation, of scholars, the famous Carroll Leach, who says many good things and then some incredibly off-base things. And they believe that Carroll had a sexual life, maybe even an adulterous, life involved with sexual encounters with married women and things, crazy stuff. Remember we know from Stuart Dodgson Collingwood that Carroll had a veil of disappointment lay over his life. Now, this is his nephew who had full access to his diaries and knew him, and that the family would excise those thoughts one, is understandable. Yet I look at a letter that he wrote to Mrs. Little in 1891. In it, he asked if he might have I'm reading now from page 69. In it, he asked if he might have a visit from Alice's younger sisters, Rhoda and Violet, then aged 33 and 27, he writes to their mother. And he asked, if I were 20 years younger, I should not, I think, be bold enough to give such invitations. But I am now close to 60 years old and all romantic sentiment has quite died out of my life. So I've become quite hardened as to having lady visitors of any age. So all romantic sentiment. So Carroll confesses to having romantic sentiments. And indeed, his poetry is filled with that kind of sappy sort of things. But we know from his diaries that during the same period, he had a lot of self-doubts. And he records his prayers and supplications to help him lead a better life. But he also writes, plain facts are, I'm quoting him, God has implanted sexual desires and has laid down conditions under which they are innocent and blessed by him, other conditions under which they are sinful and accursed. It seems that God forbids us to arouse or encourage these desires except for the subject for which
All right, looks like Edward is frozen. That's for everyone, right, Cindy? You see him frozen too?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we'll let him, Edward, sometimes if you leave and come back, that will solve the problem. In the meantime, I'm going to share, we have not so much an audience question as someone who wanted to share something. Our resident snark expert, Getz, wanted to show us Carroll's guidance to Henry Holiday for the illustration to the Barrister's Dream. So I'm going to share my screen here, which look at that at the bottom. That is delightful. And then what it became eventually.
My goodness, yes.
I know, Cindy, you're a particular fan of Carroll's illustrations, I believe.
I love them. They're so spontaneous and expressive, and I particularly like them because so many characters have their mouths wide open.
He's back.
Boy, did you get nervous, Cindy? You lost me.
Oh, don't worry.
We vamped.
I used the word sex and the video went.
So what you missed, Edward, was you missed this, which Getz shared with us. If you want to take a look at your screen there, just Carroll's guidance for Holiday for the Snark illustrations. And then actually, I don't know if we should get in, I think we should get into this question right now because I bet it's on everyone's mind, and then you guys can go back to the questions you discussed. So I'm sure we all read the excerpts from Bob Woodward's book Rage this week that had to do with Alice in Wonderland. I actually did not put that on our social media pages. I do the social media, most of the social media for the Lewis Carroll Society as well of North America, just because even though I think we could all have a field day dissecting Jared Kushner's interpretation of the Cheshire Cat, I've never thought of him as someone about a character of endurance and persistence. I do like to keep our pages blissfully politics free, so I did not post them on there. But Beverly asks, you mentioned the Trump administration. Bob Woodward's new book, Rage, quotes Jared Kushner saying Alice in Wonderland, particularly the Cheshire Cat, is one of 4 books people should read to understand Trump. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, first, I did not read Bob Woodward's book. Blissfully, unless you know, this is by the wonderful magic of internet. I'm actually in France right now, where we blissfully only hear about Trump at the first 5 minutes of the evening news at night, which is in French, and I often don't watch it. So I knew about Woodward's book, so I really don't know what the quotes were to comment on. other people want to voice their opinion, that's fine. But it's not, the New York Public Library did the 100 most important books. They're celebrating the 150th anniversary. So of course, Alice makes that list. I give the last chapter in my book about sort of the meaning of the relevancy today, Carroll or modern. So many of the quotes that, we're all mad here, seems to me, are entries into seeing our world. So Carroll, on one level is read as a little bit of a satire and British life in his time, but it also gives us a means objectively or distancing us to see our own world. So I can see where Alice certainly can, or, Trump has characteristics that are like a grotesque Carroll character, and maybe we have insights or maybe even appreciation. I don't want to, come down on something I don't know what he was trying to say, but certainly the Alice books, generally speaking, have found a way to apply to most situations in government and society. And that's why they're the most, after the Bible and certainly Dickens, one of the most, and The Little Prince, are the most quoted book in the English language, because it has great relevance. So you almost can't be wrong saying what he said. I think that's true. I mean, I'm not being specific because I don't have the specifics. And if someone else does, go for it.
Well, I compliment you on your very diplomatic answer. I think that was great. I do have
being
another.
a university president, you had to always work on that. You always were going to offend half of the people one way or the other, so you tried to offend nobody.
No, that was perfect.
No, but I think the seriousness of it is that Alice books and Carroll's nonsense and worldview does speak to the modern world vision very well, and it can be applied to enormous numbers of situations, which is why it's translated into so many languages and illustrated in so many ways. So it's only just proving what we've been saying, or I said in the last chapter, clearly, if they bring it up. But isn't that remarkable, though? 2020, and the hot issue of the day in the richest theoretical country in the world in the most advanced time of civilization, and they're quoting an 1865 book.
Yes.
Okay, going off in another direction, I just want to make sure we get all our audience questions in here. Dana asks, how long did it take you to research and write the book? This book is part of a series about writers. Did you have free reign with the contents, or were there things you had to cover? I believe you said you had free reign, right? They just said, hey, you want to write a book?
So, the answer is, I guess it took 40 years to write, as they say. And some of it is writing that I had written 40 years ago that I pulled in again. So, as I said, this series didn't exist. In fact, I sort of created it talking to this British publisher. He said, yeah, I have John Southern. He wants to write something about that. And you. And then I have this other fellow I knew had a book that publisher went bankrupt. They had a manuscript on Pynchon. So he said, well, let's do those 3 books as a kind of new series. And I said, oh, I'm not doing this book. He said, yeah, well, he knew me, he knew my work, he knew my reputation. He said, you write what you want to write about Carroll, and I'll publish it. His name is John Spears. I credit him with that in the book, in the acknowledgments, and he was true to his word. So I had the ability to write what I wanted. The first thing I did for 3 months is simply read everything that I hadn't read. And then I started the book, which took, the physical writing took 15 months, 2 summers and middle of the year, not even a summer. I agreed in May to do the book, and I started writing then. I worked through the summer, and I turned it in June 30th or July 4th of the next summer. But again, I had written quite a bit before. But what I did during that 3 months is, and what I did for this was I read everything again to make sure I believed what I believed and that I see more. And yeah, and certain themes emerged. I told you, not a particularly original one, is the duality of a book that's written for children and adults, and you can see it everywhere. Maybe I contributed a lot to the visual imagination in my writings over the years and illustrated it with the photography and the unpublished drawings and the way he shaped the illustrations and embedded them. And that had to do with language again, abandoning text for pictures at times and vice versa. The Carroll are modern would be another theme that emerged. In the one that nobody's really talked about, which is what which I'm thinking about and will write about for the next talk, is his poetry. He was a poet first. His first published work was poetry. His last published work was poetry. He always had poetry, and he, as I said before, he was great about that. So the other thing that I wanted that comes through, which is not original in the least bit, but when I read in preparing this, I read through the works. And sometimes I even read out loud. I'm on vacation or doing something and I'm reading it, and I laugh out loud. We forget just how funny this stuff is and how humor or the comic is what, and he was a master at comedy. He was trained at comedy. He wrote his first thing in Comic Times. You know, he knew Victorian comic tradition from Gilbert and Sullivan to kind of theater in an odd way. So his books are very polished works of comedy, and his poetry and his parodies are very polished and sophisticated, knowledgeable works. So yes, so that's the other thing that came through, poet first, but also as I worked, I just couldn't believe how funny it is. And I came away much more impressed with him as a creative artist than I had ever been before. And I think more people who study Carroll now are coming away the same way, which is why he's got a reputation. And there's not that many people, Dickens has one, who have this place in the popular culture, who are read by, upstairs, downstairs, listened to, heard, and are equally admired in all these places. The Harry Potter books, by the way, which Harry Potter is, no surprise, Alice and Dickens, Carroll and Dickens, major influences, clearly acknowledged. So those are books for adults and children at the same time, in my mind. I think I answered the question.
Extremely well. And do we have another question waiting for us, Heather?
Well, it's more of a comment, which is fun. I think when you were talking about the relevancy of the Alice books today, Mark writes, not just the Alice books, consider dynamics of a particle. So I don't know if you want to expound on that. Or...
Must be Mark Richards.
Actually, no, Mark Kaufman.
Oh, heavens.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark Kaufman, for the levity.
No, that's a comment, and I can say yes. Again,
Excellent.
it's a little bit inside baseball.
Yes.
I mean, think about all the pamphlets he wrote and the letters he wrote on Oxford politics.
Right.
And how he won, which are relevant in lots of ways. And then think about all his logic papers where math papers, which then had sort of relevant, intentionally, he's the most quoted logician in the world, right? He purposely had those. I talk a little bit about one of those fundamental questions in the world is, or the Alice books and all of Carroll's works and all of Carroll's diaries is answering the caterpillar, who are you? Like, who are you? So identity comes through, and Carroll's got a bunch of, and certainly the Dodson Carroll identity, which it's very nice, and I do it. Sometimes I talk about Dodson, sometimes I talk about Carroll, but they're the same person. But he did it too. He made, in his logic and even his examples from math, he became the Dodson man, introduced the Lewis Carroll humor, whimsy, imagination, absurdity at times, knowingly to be funny and to have broader appeal. You know, he was a pretty shrewd marketer. Edward Wakeling always points out he repackages all his books and does things, reuses stuff. And he certainly put in, he saw relevancy in his logic and math and his pamphlets beyond, you know, the obvious immediacy.
All right, we're coming on the end of the hour. So Cindy, I would say ask your very favorite remaining question of yours that you have left, and then we will wrap up and I will tell everyone what's coming up in October and November.
Well, this is a bit macabre, but I enjoyed what you had to say about the death jokes.
Oh.
And,
yeah.
and the murder joke.
Well, you like the murder joke, but I mean, you know, Carroll was obsessed with death and dying, you know, going, you know, the boojum fading away, you know. But that's a good illustration, though, of the duality of the Alice books. The first chapter begins with like 7 or 12, you know, death jokes. The Alice falls down the hole, and she says, I shall think nothing of tumbling downstairs. After such a fall as this, I should think nothing of falling downstairs. Well, of course she won't, because she's not thinking. How brave they'll think me at home. Why? I wouldn't say a thing about it, even if I fell off the top of the house. Of course, he's be dead. And then we get this parenthetical hint, hint, which was very likely true. Now, do you think Carroll's writing for a 7-year-old there or a 7.5-year-old there? No, I don't think so. I think this is where the transformation goes to. He's you know, playing these puns and wordplay and existential vision of the world. Life is a dream, and you know, what if you wake up, right? That's the scary one. Why, you're only sort of a thing in my dream, the king says. If that there king was awake, said Tweedledum, you'd go out bang, just like a candle. Well, bang, just like a candle is that image in Carroll's life, who I mean, he's getting old at age 30. I'm not even 60, I'm beyond sexual desire, which I didn't answer Stephanie's question fully, but I believe that we, especially the Carrollians, and we can go just for a minute or two more, we Carrollians forgive Carroll so much because we buy into that Victorian culture mentality of innocence and purity and religion and salvation and lost innocence regained, recollections of tranquility and all of that. But a lot of modern critics say, yeah, but there isn't, you can't deny the sexuality. And I think when we in this post-Freudian age look at some of those girls on a bed, you know, in nightgowns, languishingly there looking at you, I don't know that Carroll had those overt thoughts, but they are posed in a way that people would see those as seductive, or that these girls had sexual elements. Alice's beggar child, you know, I tell the story because I remember Martin Gardner saying he went around with a magnifying glass to see if Alice's nipple was showing. Carroll does this in a tradition that has nothing to do with it has to do with poor kids and charity kids and a positive image. But there's a whole tradition from Dickens on it, which Carroll knew, and there's a whole photography tradition right at the time Carroll does it. So he may be, you know, not in his head creating anything, and certainly he would never let himself do anything, because that would be violating his pledges to God, and that could never happen. He would suppress everything, but you can't pretend that those things don't exist. And that's back to the lost word, and I don't know when I said it, but I said it.
Okay, we've got a development here. Mark R. says, please, 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 can we keep this going a little more? He then follows up by saying, I'll donate $50 to the LCSNA if you keep going. So I launched a little poll just asking, should Cindy and Edward keep going?
Yes, and now they're going to say 4 will because they want their $50.
Well, no, before that, I don't know. I guess that is public, isn't it? But yes, 91% of the people who responded immediately said yes. Heck yes, keep going. We have 2 no thanks, but they can just log off and go their separate ways.
That's
So Edward,
fine.
I know it is late where you are, but if you'd like to answer maybe 2 or 3 more questions, it seems like you have an audience for it.
Sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's better to end. I mean, there's the book you can read. I recommend it highly. But again, sometimes there's a story behind the book.
All right, so Cindy, how about your next 2 favorite questions, and then?
Or does Mark for $50 have another question? That's we can have an auction.
If Mark has another question, I'll match it.
Oh, nice. Well, actually, I think Mark submitted one to you, Cindy, didn't he, before we even started?
Mark Richardson, I told you
Yes.
to ask it.
And I'm going to ask it right now. Has your
Oh,
opinion, Edward, has your opinion or understanding of CLD and or his works changed since the time of those pioneering collections of essays of the 1980s?
I guess in gambling, and I'm not a gambler, I guess you can double down on your bet, right, in blackjack. So I sort of doubled down on my bet. I had an interesting experience just very recently that in looking for, I had recalled that I had been interviewed on the radio at some point, and I wanted to find a tape recording. I've been interviewed many times, but this was on a, I couldn't remember where. I'll tell the story another time, but we found the recording because it was 1982. It's a guy named Don Swain who on CBS Radio, which is a big national radio chain, had a book a week broadcast. And for Carroll's sesquicentennial, I was the guest. So I've got this 1982 interview that I listened to just a week ago. Maybe someday we'll post it on the LCSNA website. And I didn't disagree with anything I said then, which in shape of my beliefs is very much what I believe today. What happened is, because I kept thinking about Carroll and then I reread everything, I'm much more convinced. And I think because we have the many more primary materials now, the evidence is so straight out. And speaking of evidence, I want to, that's a good point. I wanted to, the biggest mysteries about, go back to Carroll, people say that, why did he give up photography? And everyone speculated that he gave it up because some incident happened. So I thought I'd get that question, so I put a bookmark. We know exactly why he gave up photography. In fact, it comes back to his obsession with time. By the way, when I talk about themes too, I think the other overriding theme, Morton Cohen has, I think, said something like this, but and then maybe other people who are watching certainly have said it or observed it. Carroll's obsession with order is what helped him survive. He kept lists and things. He tried to order the universe to fight off fears, I believe. It's not so uncommon. You can, by analyzing something, you can break it into parts and then you can deal with it. Otherwise, it's too big and too scary. And he's always dying and always didn't have enough time, and he always wanted to do God's work. So he gave up a bunch of things, including part of his income, so he wouldn't teach anymore. And everyone speculated on those new illustrations, but when you see them, they're incredibly tame. these were not, those are not the provocative, sexually charged illustrations as much as some of those nightgown ones are. So Carroll was very clear. There had been no image, no events. He kissed some little girl or something, but no problem. So he writes in a letter to a woman who he knew and he borrowed costumes from for some of his pictures, Mrs. Gertrude Hunt. So in 1881, right after he gave up photography, but he didn't give it up like tomorrow I'm giving it up. He still took pictures, he still saw things, he still collected pictures, he still commissioned pictures. He says, quote, "The last photograph I took was in August 1880. Not one have I done this year, as there is no subject tempting enough to make me face the labor of getting the studio into working order again. It is very tiring amusement, and anything which can be equally well or better done in a professional studio for a few shillings. I would always rather have so done than go through the labor myself." So the black art, he didn't like the new techniques, all the equipment, moving it around. He said, I got other things to do. Maybe he could have been inspired, but it was just time and he wanted to get the other work done. So going back to Mark's question, so we felt that years ago, why did he give up? Not because there was some scandal, those missing pages scandal always, but there's no missing pages in 1880. But now we have pretty concrete, he can be lying, but he's not lying because there's a whole series that he's fall into. So I think I feel more comfortable with what I've always felt, and I feel enhanced in terms of his greatness as a literary artist and as a decent human being. That could be the end. No, I can't hear you, Cindy.
It's a wonderful conclusion.
All right.
Was that enough time?
I think we're going to get the donation. Mark says, excellent, enjoyed that answer.
Right.
I can also,
Cha-ching.
I'll tell you what, I'll read you the last two paragraphs of the book as the closing.
Wonderful.
This was the last chapter, Why Alice, Posthumous Productivity and Popularity. And I go through each one of these things that I've thought about, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. I once lectured on this at the Bird Collection in the public library and some universities. Why Carroll? Why Carroll? And there's a whole series, but the short answer is, why Alice? Language and character, commercialism and globalism, humor and philosophy, modernism and critical perspective, advocacy and marketing, stage and screen adaptations, great literature and ideas, dual appeal and readerships, and Alice, what an afterlife. The essential plurality of Carroll's art and craft is a key to his continuing appeal. The Alice books have, like all great literature, repaid readers and rereaders with fresh insights and aesthetic rewards. Thanks for hanging in there so long. It is not too bad, not too bad.
Yeah, what time is it?
And thank you, Cindy, a lot, and certainly Heather. This is a good precedent. So if I write a book in the next 18 months, I'll call you for.
Please do.
We'll
Please.
call you.
Yes, and Cindy, I'm sorry I usurped you as interviewer so much. We had all these great audience questions.
No,
I
this
had to
is
keep
good.
busting in.
No, this is great.
And just a reminder to everyone, we do have our fall meeting coming up on October 10th. It's going to be from approximately noon to 5 p.m. and the speakers are fantastic. You just heard one of them now. Edward will be talking about poetry, Michael Hancher, Arnold Hirschon, just so many great speakers. And for that one, you do need to register. It's free. Anyone can come watch, but go to lewiscarroll.org/events and you can register. And then for our next community event in November, we are thinking unofficially, it's top secret, a Looking Glass cocktail party. And yeah, and now November 4th is midweek, but I feel like it's got to be on November 4th, right? So yeah,
The day after the election.
oh geez, yeah, we may all be in the mood to drink no matter what the outcome.
Maybe
So
you can get Krishna to come on and explain us the election.
that would be perfect. So everyone, please go to lewiscarroll.org/events and register for our fall meeting. And thank you, Edward. Thank you, Cindy. I think this went really well, and obviously our poll results support that. And thank you all for giving us part of your Saturday. And we will talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.